Detention wasn't supposed to be this way, alone with the principal, her smile holding a secret we both refused to acknowledge. The final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. A wave of relief washed over me, another day survived, another day closer to freedom. I quickly stuffed my books into my bag and made my way towards the door, eager to escape the confines of the classroom. I had plans for the evening, nothing extravagant, just a few hours of peace to unwind from the stress of the day. But then, just as I was about to push the door open, a voice stopped me in my tracks. "Mr. Harris, I need to speak with you. Please come with me." I froze. My heart rate spiked, and my stomach sank. It was Mrs. Sullivan, the principal. Her tone was calm, but there was something in it, a quiet urgency, that immediately put me on edge. I tried to recall any reason why I might be in trouble, but nothing came to mind. I hadn't broken any rules, at least not to my knowledge. But the look in her eyes suggested I was about to find out. Reluctantly, I turned away from the door and followed her down the hall. The school, which had just moments ago been bustling with students, now felt eerily quiet. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the empty corridor as we walked, creating a rhythm that seemed out of place in the otherwise still air. Mrs. Sullivan didn't say another word, but I noticed the way she carried herself, her posture straight and dignified, as always. She was a woman who exuded authority without ever raising her voice. Her presence was commanding, but it wasn't harsh. It was as if she didn't need to demand respect because it came naturally from the way she moved and spoke. We reached her office, and she motioned for me to enter. I hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, my mind racing with all the possible scenarios. Once I was in, Mrs. Sullivan closed the door behind us with a soft click, and we were alone. The room was dimly lit, with only the light from the desk lamp casting a warm glow over the papers spread before her. The scent of lavender and something faintly citrusy hung in the air, calming, even though the situation felt anything but. She gestured to the chair across from her desk, and I sat down, still unsure of what was happening. Mrs. Sullivan was a striking woman, a little older than most of the other teachers, but still full of poise and grace. Her dark hair was pulled back into a neat bun, and her features, though sharp, held a certain softness that made her approachable. Her eyes, however, were the most intriguing, deep brown and always watchful. It felt like she saw more than just the surface, like she could read the emotions behind every word and gesture. She shuffled through the papers on her desk, not looking at me right away. The silence stretched between us, thick with anticipation. I glanced at her, unsure whether to speak, but she continued her task without acknowledging my presence, creating a tension that was almost unbearable. I shifted in my seat, trying to make sense of the situation. After what felt like an eternity, she looked up. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, everything else in the room seemed to fade away. There was no anger, no judgment in her gaze, just an almost curious calmness. "Mr. Harris," she began, her voice quiet but steady. "You found yourself in an interesting position today. I believe we need to talk." The words hung in the air like a challenge, but there was something comforting in the way she said them. It was as if this moment, this unexpected encounter, wasn't a punishment at all, but a chance for something deeper, something beyond the surface. I swallowed hard, unsure of where this conversation would lead, but something inside me whispered that I was about to learn something more than I'd ever expected. As the seconds ticked by, the silence in the room became increasingly uncomfortable. Mrs. Sullivan continued to shuffle through the papers on her desk, her movements precise and measured. I sat there, my mind racing with questions, unsure of what I had done to deserve this attention. It was almost like she was waiting for something, maybe for me to speak, or maybe for her own thoughts to settle before she could address whatever brought me here. I tried to look casual, but my fingers betrayed me, tapping nervously against the armrest of the chair. The room, quiet except for the rustling of paper and the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above, felt as though it were closing in on me. I couldn't help but notice the subtle scent of lavender in the air, something both calming and disarming. I tried to steady my breathing, but the tension in my chest was undeniable. Why was I so nervous? Then, unexpectedly, she spoke. Her voice was steady, calm, practically soothing, yet the words sent a shiver down my spine. "You've been here for a while, Mr. Harris. Still trying to figure out what brought you into my office?" I looked at her, surprised by how easily she read my mind. For a moment, I was speechless, the question hanging in the air, leaving me to wrestle with the uncertainty of the situation. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How could I explain what was going through my head? It wasn't that I was scared of her, exactly, it was just her presence. There was something about it, something powerful yet strangely inviting, that made it impossible for me to remain unaffected. She must have sensed my hesitation. With a soft sigh, she set the papers down and looked at me, her deep brown eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to understand me better. The room was still quiet, but there was a subtle shift in the air, something heavier, more palpable. I shifted in my seat, trying to find the words to respond, but all I could do was nod. That's when I noticed it, the faintest of smiles tugging at the corner of her lips. It wasn't a smile of amusement, but one that suggested understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the tension between us. The way she held my gaze, steady and unwavering, made my pulse quicken. For a moment, it felt like time had slowed down, as if there was more at play here than just a simple detention. Her smile lingered for just a moment too long, and I realized that there was more to this encounter than I had first understood. There was something unspoken between us, something neither of us dared to acknowledge, but it was there, lingering in the quiet tension of the room. The stillness in the room felt almost too much to bear. I was acutely aware of every tiny movement, every shift in Mrs. Sullivan's posture, every breath I took. The seconds ticked by, each one stretching into what felt like minutes. Her eyes, warm but observant, never left me. It was almost as if she was waiting for me to say something, to offer some explanation for why I was sitting across from her in her office after school hours. Finally, she broke the silence. Her voice, always calm and composed, now carried an unexpected softness. "You know," she began, her tone casual but sincere, "sometimes I wonder how much of what we do here is really about the students or just about us, the ones in charge. We spend so much time keeping things in line, but do we ever stop and think about why it matters?" Her words hung in the air, unexpected, as if she were opening a window into her own thoughts. I wasn't sure what she meant, but the vulnerability in her voice caught me off guard. It wasn't the voice of the strict principal who enforced the rules, it was something quieter, more introspective, like she was sharing a part of herself she didn't normally show. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. But there was something about the way she spoke, something real in her words, that made me feel compelled to answer. It felt like I wasn't just sitting there as a student in trouble, but as someone she wanted to connect with, even if only for a moment. "I think about that too sometimes," I said, my voice quieter than usual. "It's like we're all just playing parts, but, what's the point, you know? I mean, we're just here, stuck in this cycle, day in and day out." She nodded, her gaze softening, almost as if she were seeing me in a new light. Her eyes lingered on mine, and for the first time, I felt like she truly understood. There was no judgment in her expression, just a quiet acknowledgement of the frustration and confusion I had been feeling. "I understand," she said, her voice quieter now. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough, if I'm really helping, or if I'm just part of the system, too." The way she said it made me realize that despite her position, she wasn't immune to the doubts and uncertainties that we all face. She wasn't just the principal, she was a person, too. That realization struck me harder than I expected, and for a moment, the power dynamic between us seemed to disappear. As we continued to talk, the conversation flowed more easily. I began to open up, sharing thoughts I hadn't even realized I had. It felt good, like I wasn't just a student trying to survive a detention, but someone being seen and heard. Mrs. Sullivan didn't rush me, didn't interrupt. She simply listened, and in that quiet space between us, something shifted. The conversation slowly tapered off, and once again, the room was filled with a quiet stillness. But this time, it wasn't awkward. It was a comfortable silence, one where neither of us felt the need to fill the empty spaces with words. I could feel the weight of her gaze on me, steady and unwavering, as if she were looking past the surface and into something deeper. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it made my pulse quicken all the same. I shifted slightly in my seat, trying to maintain my composure. But something about the way she looked at me made me uneasy in a way I couldn't quite explain. I wasn't used to being seen like this, truly seen. There was no judgment in her eyes, no authority or distance. Just a quiet understanding, like she was searching for something I couldn't put into words. And every time I met her gaze, the tension between us seemed to build, though neither of us acknowledged it directly. I looked away, focusing on the papers scattered across her desk, but I could still feel the weight of her eyes on me, lingering. It was as if we were sharing something unspoken, a connection that neither of us wanted to name but both sensed. When I glanced back up at her, I caught her watching me again, her lips curving slightly into a small, knowing smile. It wasn't a smile of amusement, it was something softer, something more intimate, as if she understood the quiet struggle I was feeling, the tension that had settled in the air between us. I tried to look away, but it was impossible. Her gaze held me captive, drawing me in with an intensity that felt both foreign and familiar. It was as though, in this moment, time had slowed down, and everything else in the world had faded away, leaving just the two of us in this quiet room, suspended in the space between us. For a brief moment, I wondered if she felt it too, this undeniable pull that neither of us could explain. Her eyes held something more than just authority or kindness. There was something else there, something fragile and unspoken, and it made my heart beat faster. "Mr. Harris," she said softly, breaking the spell. "I think we've talked enough for today." Her voice, gentle but firm, pulled me back to reality. I nodded, almost relieved, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more we were both afraid to say. That the moment, though fleeting, had meant something, something we couldn't fully grasp yet. As I stood to leave, I felt her eyes on me once more, and I couldn't help but glance back. She wasn't smiling now, but there was a softness in her expression, something vulnerable that I hadn't noticed before. For a brief second, it felt like the space between us wasn't just filled with tension anymore, it was filled with the potential for something more. The conversation had tapered off, but the tension remained, silent, almost tangible, hanging in the air like a delicate thread between us. It wasn't just the words we had exchanged, but the way our eyes met, the way the space between us seemed to draw closer with every passing second. It was something deeper than a simple conversation, it was a connection, fragile yet undeniable, threading its way through every glance, every pause. Mrs. Sullivan, usually so composed, seemed quieter now. Her gaze, still steady and unwavering, had softened, like she was trying to decipher something, maybe me, maybe herself. It was as if the walls that she usually kept up so well had begun to crack, just a little, allowing something raw and real to slip through. I could feel it too. The way my heart raced in my chest, and the quiet flutter in my stomach when she looked at me. There was something about the way she carried herself, her calm strength mixed with a quiet vulnerability, that made it impossible not to be drawn in. But I couldn't tell if it was something I was imagining or if she felt it too. There was no verbal acknowledgement of it, nothing overt, but the way our silence stretched out between us, comfortable yet charged, made me question everything I thought I knew about her. She shifted slightly in her seat, her fingers brushing the edge of a paper on her desk, the smallest movement that felt charged in the stillness. It was as if she, too, was holding back, unsure of how to proceed, but unwilling to break the moment. For the first time, she didn't feel like just my principal. She felt human, just like me, struggling with her own thoughts, her own emotions. The power dynamic between us that had been so clear before now seemed to blur, replaced by something gentler, something that neither of us could quite define. I noticed the subtle way she folded her hands on the desk, as though trying to keep them still, as though her body language was betraying the thoughts racing through her mind. Her eyes met mine again, and I couldn't help but feel the weight of her gaze, not just as a figure of authority, but as someone who understood the quiet moments of doubt, the longing for something deeper, even if it was unspoken. For a moment, there was no need for words. The air between us seemed to hum with something, an understanding, a shared vulnerability, that we couldn't deny. It wasn't a conversation anymore, it was a quiet dance of emotions, neither of us willing to take the first step, but both of us aware that something was unfolding, whether we wanted it to or not. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost a whisper, as if the words were meant just for me. "Mr. Harris," she began, her eyes never leaving mine, "I think we're both here for a reason, don't you?" Her words hung in the air, unspoken yet clear. The tension between us was no longer just about detention or authority. It was about something deeper, something neither of us could name but both understood. The silence in the room was no longer uncomfortable, it had transformed into something far more intimate. Mrs. Sullivan leaned back slightly in her chair, her eyes no longer focused on the papers in front of her, but on me. I could feel her gaze settle on me, soft but intense, as though she were measuring each word before it left her lips. It was then that I realized, this wasn't just about a detention. It was about something deeper, something neither of us had been able to name until now. Her voice, when it came, was softer than before, almost hesitant. "You know," she began, pausing for just a beat, "I've spent most of my life trying to be what others expect me to be. A principal, a figure of authority, someone who knows exactly what to say, what to do. But sometimes, I wonder if I've been missing something important. If I've been playing a role so long that I've forgotten who I really am." I sat there, still as stone, absorbing her words. They weren't what I had expected at all. Mrs. Sullivan, strong, confident, unshakable, was opening up to me in a way I had never imagined. She wasn't just my principal anymore. In this quiet moment, she was just another person, vulnerable in her own way, sharing a part of herself that she usually kept hidden behind the walls of authority. I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of respect for her in that moment. It was one thing to stand in front of a room of students and command attention, it was another to sit quietly, in a private space, and reveal the fears and doubts that you kept buried. "I've always wondered if I'm doing enough," she continued, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "If I'm really making a difference in the lives of those I'm supposed to be guiding. But sometimes, it feels like I'm just part of the system, and that makes me wonder if I've lost sight of what really matters." Her words resonated with me more than I expected. I wasn't just a student in trouble anymore. I was someone listening to another human being, someone who, despite the differences in age and authority, was just as confused and uncertain as I was. I shifted slightly in my seat, the weight of her vulnerability settling over me. I had always seen her as a figure of strength, but now I saw the cracks, the small fractures in her carefully constructed armor. Without thinking, I spoke, my voice quieter than usual. I think we're all just trying to find our way, right? No one really knows what they're doing. We're just doing our best to make it work." Her eyes softened, and for the briefest moment, I saw something in her gaze that I hadn't noticed before, something unguarded, almost relieved. "You're right, Mr. Harris," she said, her smile small but genuine. "We are all just trying to make it work." It was a moment of connection, something beyond the roles we played. There was no longer a principal and a student. There were just two people, standing at the crossroads of their own lives, each with their own doubts, their own questions, and a quiet understanding that maybe, just maybe, they weren't so different after all. The room, which had been charged with unspoken tension and lingering glances, began to settle into a quiet, almost peaceful rhythm. Mrs. Sullivan sat back in her chair, her hands folded neatly in front of her, as if the conversation we'd shared had somehow shifted things between us, made them feel more real, more human. There was a brief moment of stillness where neither of us spoke, and yet, it felt as if everything had been said without words. I found myself studying her once more, though this time, I wasn't just noticing her posture or her authoritative air. This time, I was noticing the subtle shift in her demeanor, the softness in her eyes, and the quiet way she seemed to be allowing herself to relax. It was strange to think that, in the span of an hour, the woman I had always seen as untouchable, as a figure of command and control, could become so approachable. So human. I couldn't help but wonder what had caused the change, why, after all these years of watching her in the halls, she had suddenly decided to open up. Maybe it was the shared vulnerability, the way she had allowed herself to be seen, to expose the doubts and fears she usually kept hidden behind the walls of her office. Or maybe it was the fact that, in that quiet, private space, she had finally allowed herself to be a person, not just a principal. Mrs. Sullivan glanced at the clock on the wall. The minutes seemed to have slipped away unnoticed, and I realized with a slight jolt that detention was nearly over. The heavy silence between us lingered for a few seconds more before she finally broke it, her voice as calm and composed as ever, yet carrying a warmth I hadn't noticed before. "Well, Mr. Harris," she began, her lips curving up into a small but knowing smile. "I think our time together is just about up." She gestured toward the door, a subtle invitation for me to leave. But there was something in her smile, a softness, a gentleness, that held me there for a moment longer. I felt my pulse quicken, and for a second, I found myself at a loss for words. It was as if the room had somehow shrunk, the space between us tightening in a way that felt both comforting and unsettling at once. That smile, it wasn't just a polite gesture or a dismissal, it was something more. It was an acknowledgement. An understanding. Something shared between us that neither of us had openly named, but that both of us felt. I stood slowly, unsure if I should say anything. My eyes locked with hers, and for a brief second, I felt a strange sense of connection, something that transcended the roles we played. She was still my principal, still the authority figure in this equation, but in that moment, I felt as if we were equals. Two people who had shared something meaningful, something quietly powerful, without saying a word. And somehow, that felt more significant than anything either of us could have articulated aloud. As I reached for the door, I turned back to her. Her smile was still there, though it had softened slightly. She was looking at me in a way that I couldn't quite explain, her eyes warm and almost affectionate, as if she was proud of something I hadn't realized about myself. It was a smile that said, "I see you, not as a student or as someone in trouble, but as a person. Take care of yourself, Mr. Harris," she said quietly, her voice carrying the same warmth that had been in her smile. "You're not alone in this, you know. We all have our moments of doubt. Just don't forget that you're capable of more than you think." The words hit me harder than I expected. I felt a lump form in my throat, but I swallowed it down, unsure of how to respond. She wasn't just dismissing me. She wasn't simply giving me some generic advice. She was acknowledging me as more than just the student who had ended up in detention. She was seeing something in me that I hadn't even fully realized myself. I nodded, my voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan." I opened the door, stepping out into the hallway. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter, this quiet, unexpected connection, had changed something within me. I had come to detention expecting nothing more than a simple punishment, but instead, I had walked away with something far more valuable, a glimpse into someone's vulnerability, an acknowledgement of my own, and a shared moment of understanding that transcended the boundaries of student and principal. The hallway outside was quiet, the sounds of the school day fading behind me. But as I made my way toward the exit, I found myself smiling, almost involuntarily. It wasn't just because I had survived detention, but because I had been seen. Truly seen, in a way that I had never expected. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now.